We're pleased to announce the release of Sage 100 Contractor version 27.2. This video explains the enhancements to employee sick time management. After viewing this video, you'll know how to set up sick time accruals and caps when you have employees who perform work in different U.S. states within a given year. Many U.S. states have implemented standard minimum rules for how much sick time is accrued, capped, and carried over from year to year. If you have employees who work in different states during a given year, you might need to apply exceptions to your sick time accrual policies to comply with these regulations. If your company's sick time accrual, capping, and limits is greater than the minimum required for all states in which your employees work, you can have a standard policy that applies to all employees without issue. If this is the case, you wouldn't need to implement the new sick time feature introduced with this release. However, if your current policy falls short of the requirements in any of the states in which your employees work, you might have challenges with ensuring compliance in each state. The new sick time feature in Sage 100 Contractor version 27.2 simplifies this for you. Let's look at an example. Imagine that a state, such as New Mexico, has a policy that employees must accrue at least 1 sick hour for every 30 hours worked. The waiting period before they can take sick time must be no greater than 90 days from the start of their employment, and the cap on annual accrual of sick time must be no less than 40 hours per year. If employees don't take all of their sick time in a given year, they must be allowed to accrue at least 80 hours. Arizona, which neighbors New Mexico, allows employees to accrue 1 sick hour for every 40 hours worked. The waiting period can be as long as 120 days from the start of their employment. Colorado has no relevant policies. We'll include it just to see how the system handles all situations. Regulations might also specify minimums for how many hours of sick time can be taken per year, and how many unused hours can be carried over from year to year. Now let's imagine that a new employee starts on January 1st and works in Arizona full-time for 12 weeks, or 84 days. They will have accrued 12 hours of sick time, or 1 hour for every 40 worked, but they can't take any sick time until they reach 120 days of employment. The employee then spends the next 12 weeks working in New Mexico. At the end of those weeks, they'll have accrued 16 hours, or 1 hour for every 30 hours worked. They can take sick time starting 90 days from the start of their employment. They then work 4 weeks in Colorado, where sick time is not governed by any state laws. States also have varying requirements about how sick time is reported on pay stubs. Typically, pay stubs must show the hours of accrued sick leave that are available and the hours of sick leave used year to date. In some cases, employers must also show the amount paid for sick leave taken. So let's jump in and see how it works. For any employee who works in just one state throughout the year, you can use the 521 Employee Setup Windows Compensation tab to track their sick time. This area has not changed with this release, and it's adequate for any employees who do not work in multiple states. For employees who work in multiple states, you'll use 531 payroll calculations. Let's create a new calculation called New Mexico State Sick Hours Accrual. We've added some new tax types to accommodate state sick time calculations: state sick hours accrual, taken, and carryover. For each state whose sick time you'll track, you'll need to set up each of these 3 calculation types. We'll start by adding the accrual calculation first. This calculates the number of hours, not dollars, that the employee accrues. For the default rate, we'll enter the fraction of an hour accrued for each hour worked. New Mexico stipulates 1 hour of sick time for 30 hours worked, or 0.033 hours accrued per hour worked. We'll set the default max to the number of hours employees can accrue per year, which is 40. For the max type, we've added a new option, 10 hours per year. In the state sick hours area, for accrual cap, enter the state's cap on total accrual. For New Mexico, this is 80. Select whether to allow sick hours to be carried over, and any carryover limit if applicable. Every state sick hour calculation must have an entry for the tax state. In this case, it's New Mexico. We're ready to save this record and create the second calculation. This time, we'll create the calculation of sick hours taken. For the tax type, we'll select 23, state sick hours taken. This will track how many sick hours an employee has taken in a given year, and again, the system is tracking hours, not dollars. For the default max, we'll enter the cap on the number of hours the employee is allowed to take in this state, and select the max type of 10, hours per year. For this tax type, the state sick hours area lets you enter the initial waiting period after the start of employment that the employee must wait before taking sick time off. All of the state sick hour calculations require an entry for the tax state. We'll save this record and create the third calculation. This will be state sick hours carryover. We'll select the appropriate tax type and enter the tax state. We don't need to set any additional options for this record. In our scenario, you would next set up the same 3 payroll calculations for Arizona, and for any additional states you'll need to track. For each employee who works in multiple states, you'll add these 3 payroll calculations to their 521 employee record. Before now, you've been able to enter sick time calculations on the Compensation tab. These fields are used to calculate sick time accrued for all hours worked, no matter in which state the work happened. This functionality has not changed with this release. Sick time calculations on the Compensation tab are completely separate and independent of the state-specific sick time calculations we've just created. For existing employees, you might already have entries here that govern how sick time is accrued. For employees who work in multiple states, you can continue calculating their sick time using the Compensation tab fields no matter which state they work in. This works as long as your sick time rates and policies are more generous than all states in which the employee works. If your company policy is to not accrue sick time as separate from vacation time, you can leave these fields blank, and that policy will be applied whenever employees work in a state that does not have sick time regulations. The new calculations will cover work in states with sick time requirements to ensure you're in compliance. The Calculations tab is where you add all of the calculations that pertain to specific employees. We'll add the 3 calculations we just created for both New Mexico and Arizona. The effect of this is that whenever the employee works in New Mexico, they'll accrue sick time at the rate we specified for New Mexico. When they work in Arizona, the calculations for Arizona are used. If they work in Colorado, which has no state-specific calculations, you'll want them to accrue time at the rate specified on the Compensation tab. That's the process for setting up the calculations, so they're in place for the next time you run payroll. Now let's imagine that we've entered time for a multi-state employee. In order for state-specific sick time to be calculated, a locale must be entered so the system knows which state rules are to be applied. If no locale is entered, the system uses the state listed in the header of the record. There also must be an entry for hours, because all of the state-specific calculations are based on the number of hours worked. This applies particularly to salaried employees who don't normally have timesheets with hours. In order to track state sick time, you'll need to begin capturing hours worked for all employees. If you've specified a waiting period for state sick time, the system alerts you if you enter sick time taken prior to the waiting period's end date. However, the system doesn't stop you from entering that time at your discretion. The State Sick Hours button lets you see how much sick time is available for the employee to take to help you when entering sick time for employees. This button remains available until you do a final computation of payroll, after which it is unavailable. You can also see this button on the 521 employee record, where it is always available. We'll compute payroll now to see the results. Once we compute final payroll, we can go to 522 payroll records to see the results. On the Calculations tab, you see the calculations applied for the specified pay period. These show the time accrued based on the number of hours worked in each of the states. Time taken is based on any time card entries for sick time taken. When you close the payroll year, any remaining state sick time that falls below the carryover cap is moved to the new year based on the state sick hours carryover calculation. You'll see a separate item in 522 payroll records with the check number Sick Hours Carryover. These calculations are how carryover amounts are tracked. Don't change the dates or any other information about these carryover calculations. If you ever need to make corrections to an employee's time accrued, taken, or carried over, you can do this with a hand-computed check. This could happen if you apply state-specific calculations in the middle of the year, or if you need to enter carryover sick time at the start of the year. Note that under normal circumstances, the carryover entries are created when you close the payroll year. In this video, you learned how to use the new state-specific sick time calculations for multi-state employees.